firstly, great. I'm so excited to meet you in person. Virtually in person. To start off, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what your background is?
Sure. So, hi, my name is Simon Cutajar, and I was born in Malta to Maltese parents. I spent my early childhood in St. Julian's, but I consider myself to be from Aura, since that's basically where I grew up. My mom is from Slema, and my father is from Zebuch. When I was born and grew up in Malta, I left the island at 21 to pursue higher education. I've lived in Denmark and the United Kingdom, and I'm currently based in Stockholm, Sweden. I try to keep myself engaged with what's going on back home, and I try to visit at least once a year if I can. Having lived away from the island for so long, it basically means that over time I've developed a strong interest in the country's legends, folklore, history, and language, as you can probably attest to our many discussions over Twitter.
So many discussions. I am forever grateful for you constantly answering my little barrage of questions. I know I find it really hard to get my hands on any kind of reference material here in Australia. How do you go about gathering resources and gathering stories?
Well, it's a bit tricky since I no longer live in Malta, I'm limited to the information immediately available to me, and I don't really have the luxury of visiting, say, the National Archives or the libraries in Malta. However, if you know where to look, there's a surprising amount of information available on the internet. There's also a lot of material available in published materials, such as books, which you can probably find to buy, though some of it is extremely hard to find because of small print runs.
What kind of folk stories do you want to talk about today?
I thought I'd talk about a few legends I found that discuss the origins of the Maltese people. I have to admit I was only aware of around one or two legends at first, but I ended up going down a surprisingly deep rabbit hole with around 8 different legends across 4 different languages.
So amazing.
Yeah, it was a trip, to be honest. I've provided citations for all the material I've referred to, so you can do your own reading and go down your own rabbit holes, feel free.
So I'm really excited to see what you've put together, because as you told me, you've been translating these legends and kind of bringing them to life. What did you want to talk about?
As best I can. And with that said, I think we can begin.
Oh.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about a person who I think was seminal in basically the study and collecting of folklore in Malta, and this is basically Manuel Magri. So he was born in 1851 in Valletta, Malta. He was ordained a Jesuit priest, and he contributed to early archaeological excavations in the Maltese islands, notably, for example, Al Saflieni. He is also considered to be one of the 5 pioneers of the study of Maltese folklore, together with the Italian Luigi Bonelli, the Germans Hans Stumme and Berta Elg, and the Maltese Cenzo Busuttil. So, even over 100 years ago, Magri was already keenly aware that Maltese folklore and folktales were fading in front of his eyes. So he tried to write down as much as he could. He made trips to Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon to compare the local folklore with that of Malta, and he traveled to Tunisia for more archaeological research. Magri also expressed interest in traveling to Libya in order to find out more about a tribe of Maltese origin that had settled there before the Arab period, but unfortunately he died suddenly in Sfax, Tunisia in 1907. So I think I'll start with a legend that first appeared in 1902. So it was part of a series of local publications called Kodbat al-Modiya Tazmin. Magri's writings from the series were collected by the folklorist George Mifsud Kirkop to form the book Ghariema, which I have here. So it's this. So I've translated this particular legend from its original Maltese into English. So any translation errors are my own.
All right, let's do it. I'm excited.
So I'm obviously not going to read from this because this is entirely Maltese and I've already done the translation. So, when was it that people in Malta used to travel with land ships? Here's what the Maltese say. When the land was flat, when it was under the control of a single sultan, when the Maltese islands were joined together and to the lands in the southwest, before the land broke apart. They also say that one could travel using land ships. Both the Maltese and the distant past, as well as of today, will say that when our ancestors came here, there were no people, no buildings, and no trees. There was nothing but wild thyme. There were no places suitable for people to live, save for seaside caves or other places further inland. They began by digging channels for olive trees and grapevines. They built rubble walls, and to begin with, they lived in huts. The holes in the rock made for the hut's wooden beams are still visible everywhere.
That is amazing. It's just this image of Malta, this barren island with just wild thyme.
It honestly is one of my favorite legends.
Just, didn't the Roman name for Malta come from Maltese, the name for the honey from the thyme?
I was actually looking at that yesterday, and there's a whole sort of like, is it Roman? Is it Greek? Is it, nobody really knows. There are a lot of different theories. So yeah, nobody really knows.
Mash like everything else is.
Yeah, precisely. And given that it's a bit hard to find written evidence for that sort of thing. I mean, there is written evidence, but it's like, oh, Melita. And then it's like, is it this? But there's another island called Melita. Are we talking about that? It's the same with Gozo. It's like, oh, are we talking about another island? So it's really confusing.
Yeah, it's all over the shop.
So this is one of my favorite Maltese legends for many reasons, and I've spent countless hours trying to extract glimmers of meaning from it. It clearly must be a very old legend, since it describes the Maltese islands as a single landmass, as opposed to an archipelago. Could this be, for example, a description of the temple builders that once lived in Malta? Are the land ships the source of the cart ruts commonly found on the islands? Who were these ancestors of ours that came to these lands, and where do they come from? And when did they come?
It's interesting because even my grandfather over here in Australia, we hear about the cart ruts. They apparently they're right near the house where he grew up, and they go right off the edge of the cliff. So it's really cool.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, it's really cool trying to imagine where they come from, where were they going, and how are they so prominent.
And why they were there. There are several theories, but no one really knows.
So are there any other legends that relate to this one?
Sure. So let's take a step back and look at history, which will inevitably lead us to more origin legends. Historian Victor J. Gallia discusses the similarities between the legend I just described and an account given by Arab geographer Ibn Abd al-Munim al-Himyarī. Unfortunately, not much is known about Al-Himyarī, except that he was from the Maghreb region in North Africa and lived around the 14th or 15th century. In this account, before the Hijri year 440, which is roughly Common Era year 1049, Al-Himyarī describes Malta as being an uninhabited ruin after having been ransacked by an Arab raid. It was visited only by shipbuilders for the island's wood, by fishermen for its fish, and for anyone willing to collect honey. Malta's honey was renowned because of the use of thyme, which is mentioned in Magri's legend, so that's particularly interesting. Another person, Muhammad Abu al-Asim ibn Hawal, a 10th century Arab writer and geographer from Nusibis in the Abbasid Caliphate, also made reference to Malta in his work Surat al-Ard, as being inhabited only by donkeys, sheep, and bees. Though since he never actually visited Malta, he can't really be considered a reliable resource. The Arabs eventually repopulated the islands and fortified it by building the Cittadella in Gozo and rebuilding Mdina in Malta.
So this is what you're describing is a very different history than what I assumed growing up in Australia with very little physical connection to Malta. So this is really interesting, seeing that Malta might have connections to the Arab world. Did you want to go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So here's a legend about the origins of the Maltese taken from Joseph C. Camilleri's book, Ġabra ta' Leġġendi. So there's a legend in here that states it was collected by Manuel Magri from somebody in Kebsham, in Gozo. And I've translated this legend from Maltese to English. One day, a group of Maltese fishermen left Malta and sailed to Algeria. They were slowly approaching the shore when some Algerians noticed them and began sailing towards them to attack them. When they noticed this, the Maltese stopped and began shouting, saying, "We are children of Aram." When the Algerians heard this, they went to welcome them, saying, "We are your brothers." So, Magri and other contemporary scholars were convinced at the time that Maltese traditions and legends were of Phoenician origin. However, in various localities in Malta and Gozo, Magri was told over and over again by the Maltese that they were descended from the people of Aram. Aram, or Aramea, is a region that covers most of what is now Syria.
That's really interesting that the scholars had it almost so wrong, and that yet the local people still retained that knowledge.
There was this, by scholars, there was this odd fascination with like, oh, we must have descended from Phoenicians. So they were trying to shoehorn everything into being like, oh, this is clearly tied to Phoenicians or Punic history, whereas the locals had other ideas and knew better. So there's actually another legend collected by Cutajar from Bethlehem. It was published in 1932. And it claims that the Maltese are descended from local shepherds that fled to Malta. He collected this legend from a local woman named Warda. I've translated this account from Maltese to English, so again, any errors are my own. In Bethlehem, it is said that there is a large cave that still has the following words engraved at its opening. "We have filled this cave with black raisins, but you cannot even fill it with hay." The people that wrote these words lived like Arabs, lived in huts, and elected a leader from among themselves, one that they thought the wisest. They referred to him as the elder. They used to herd rams. One day, these shepherds heard that there were murderers, foreigners, in their area. They went to the elder to see what they could do, whether or not they should fight or negotiate with them. They were divided, and the elder did not want to pick a side, so he said, "Come tomorrow, and I will give you your answer. Just let me think." At dawn the next day, they went to find the elder, only to realize that he and his family were gone. They were shocked, as they had always known him to be a man of his word. One of the shepherds, however, noticed an upside-down basket in the middle of his hut. Lifting it up, they found two pigeons, one with its wings cut, and the other perfectly fine. The uninjured pigeon promptly flew away, while the one that had its wings cut ran around for a bit and went to hide. The shepherds stopped to try to figure out what the elder meant by this. And finally, one of them said, "Oh, I've got it. Whoever can flee must flee, and whoever cannot flee must hide." They took all their necessary belongings and their rams and began to walk. However, they began to hear that the invading foreigners were all around them, including in nearby Egypt and Syria. Thus, they sold their fields, took a ship from Jaffa, and sailed to Malta, where they became the ancestors to today's Maltese.
I mean, look, I've heard of messenger pigeons. Pigeons as a message, something totally different. And my favorite part of that is that the elder just went, "Nah, I'm done. I'm out of here.
I'm out.
Stop you guys. Stop your fighting. Goodbye."
Figure it out on your own.
All right. You mentioned that you got another legend related to Algeria. Do you want to get into that one?
Yes. So there is José Cassar Policino, a prominent Maltese folklorist, recounts an Algerian legend from Algiers, where the first Algerians fled from their original homeland and eventually settled in Algeria. However, some stopped in Malta on the way and remained there, becoming the ancestors to the first Maltese. So that's another possible explanation and origin legend. There's also another account by José Bosco, an Algerian citizen of Maltese origin. And he has another account relating to the Maltese being the children of Aram, or Ulied in Maltese, stating that these were Arabs that lived 30 kilometers away from Constantine, Algeria. And Gallia claims that Ulied are related to what he calls Tribut al-Abayel, or Berbers, noting that at the time, anybody who was Muslim was considered Arab. The account, which I've translated from Maltese to English, is as follows. One day, a Turk visited Ghariema and stopped at a family. To show respect, the head of the household began to cook a whole chicken for him. One of the children began to cry, and to appease him, his mother gave him a thigh from the cooked chicken. When the Turk was presented with the cooked chicken, he began to shout, saying, "What did you do with the other chicken thigh?" When the mother told him what had happened, he cruelly said, "Then your son will pay." The Turk unsheathed his sword and cut off the son's thigh. As soon as they saw this, the people of Ghariema left their country and went to Malta, became Christian, and they are the ancestors of the present-day Maltese.
This one is terrifying. Every time I read it, I'm like, oh my God.
It's also important to remember that for the Maltese, any Arabs were considered and referred to as Turks. I guess such as was the influence of the Ottoman Turks when Malta was controlled by the Knights of St. John. There's also an interesting claim by Bosco, that basically Ghariema, the term itself, was originally a reference to the Roman type quirina, which he claims eventually broke down to become the word Ariema.
That's amazing.
I couldn't really find more information about this, so take from that what you will.
That's amazing that, you've got Romans in there as well. Like there's so many different origin stories.
And it's not like the Maltese aren't known for breaking down words and turning them into their own versions, so it's plausible, but...
All right. Did you mention you had a legend related to Tunisia as well?
Yes. So there are a few related to Tunisia, actually. So here's one other legend collected by Manuel Magri from Tunis, also found in the book Ghariema, and again translated from Maltese to English by myself. So there were two siblings that married two other siblings. At first, they lived together, but one day they had an argument and decided to live apart. One couple went to live in Malta and are the ancestors of all Maltese, while one other couple stayed in Tunisia and are the ancestors of all Tunisians. Maltese accompanying the knights on their annual corso when landing close to Tunis also used to say, "Hawn il-Maltija għandhom semhom f'din l-art." The Maltese had their counterparts in that land. This is also strangely corroborated in a book published in 1856 by Guglielmo Finotti, an Italian who was exiled to Tunisia due to his involvement in the Risorgimento, the unification of Italy. In particular, he states that to the east of Tunis, the tribe of Ulied Said claimed that they share ancestors with the Maltese. Perhaps this was the tribe that Manuel Magri was looking for before his sudden death. We may never know.
I like to imagine that Magri found them and he stayed with them, and it's a much better ending to his story. That's why
I would have been preferable, yes. There's a lot, his sudden death was really unfortunate because he had a lot of material. So he would have done so much more work with regards to Maltese folklore and archaeology.
I mean, look, when I started researching, when I actually started properly putting my head down to find stuff, his name was the first one on every list. Every book I've got has got a reference to him in there somewhere.
Yeah, he's pretty much seminal when it comes to the beginnings of Maltese folklore. So there are two more legends about the origins of the Maltese people that I haven't discussed yet. And for one reason is they give very different renditions. So the first account is from a book in Latin written by Bartolomeo de Nea Castro, a 13th century judge from Messina, Sicily. He provides an account collected from the Tunisian island of Ġabra, which basically claimed that all inhabitants of the islands between Sicily and Africa were the offspring of the black Egyptian god Amun and a group of Byzantine Greek women from Sicily. The second account again comes from Manuel Magri, collected from Zurri in Malta, and again also taken from his book Ghariema. Seriously, that book is amazing. So here's the account. I've again translated it from Maltese to English, so any mistakes are my own. There was once a giantess that had 2 children, a boy and a girl. She used to raise them in the woods. One day, what seemed to be a large boat approached the shores, and some people disembarked from the boat. They kidnapped the giantess's kids and fled. Around noon, the giantess returned to the woods to feed her kids, but saw that they were missing. At this, something made her look towards the sea, where she saw the boat in the distance. She began swimming towards it and quickly caught up. As she placed her hand to come aboard the boat, one of the sailors pulled out a blade and cut off both of her hands, where she fell back into the sea and drowned. Eventually, those sailors came to Malta. The giantess child grew up, got married in Gozo, and all Gozatins are descended from her. The giant child also grew up, got married in Mosta, and all people from Mosta are descended from him. Malta's folklore is full of stories about giants, but that's going to have to wait for another video. I have cold Al-Himyarī. Well, actually, they've warmed up a bit now, but they're best warm, so...
I have stone cold pastizzi. let's say that I have warm and crispy pastizzi.
Sure. Yeah, no one needs to know.
Let's go with that. So you made them yourself. Tell me about the process, how you made them, what they're made from, why they're so delicious.
I mean, so basically, it's a Maltese date-filled pastry. I can show you here.
Yum!
The actual ones are a lot bigger, but that's fine. They're kind of like roadside snacks. You traditionally find them at like small kiosks, where you would grab them for, snacks on the go. And I basically followed the recipe off of a book called Taste of Malta by Anton B. Dougall. It's this.
Woohoo.
But you can find a copy of that recipe online if you want to make your own. There's a link in the description.
I am gonna be trying that.
They're very Moorish.
Oh, I remember my nonna used to have them on the table when I was a kid, but I don't think I really liked them when I was really little, if that makes sense. I just think that was like the flavor profile. I was more just straight for the pastizzi, stay away from the peas, ricotta only.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. Ricotta is the best pastizzi.
It is the best.
That's basically it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for having me on and for allowing me to share with you some of the origin legends of the Maltese people.
No, that was absolutely incredible. Even more incredible that you've taken these, translated them. So now, all of us over here in the diaspora, whether we're in Australia, Canada, UK, anywhere, we can actually know a little bit more about it.
Yeah, they're now available in English from this video, and I'm more than happy for people to become more interested in Maltese folklore and our origins, basically. But in Malta, I left the island, and actually, you know what? I'm going to move this monitor.
Are there any authors? I'm going to start a question over.
I ended going.
It's that's quite an interesting mind shift.
By Arab geographer Ibn Abd Ibn Abd al-Munim Al-Himyarī. Okay, the Abd threw me off.